Hey everyone, it's Sleepy Reader, aka Damien, drinking some tea out of the coffee mug. It's been, I think, about 10 days. Welcome back to my comic book reading diary, and with also a haul. But anyway, one of the first things I wanted to mention reading this week was The Spectre from 1969 or 68, number 8. A real crazy ride. Had me wondering, what kind of readers was DC thinking they were aiming at? Because their superhero comics were very kid-like, and this, I don't know, it feels like it's aimed at maybe 20, 22-year-olds or something. Because it's very psychedelic and doesn't have, I don't know. Anyway, then a very exciting read for me this week was The Tomb of Dracula, Day of Blood, Night of Redemption. These are a 4-issue or 4-volume prestige series from Epic Comics back, Marvel's Epic line back in 1991. So it allowed Marv Wolfman and Gene Colan to return to their Dracula masterpiece, but be much more intense and adult about it because it was part of the Epic line. And this kind of does serve as a direct sequel to their 70-issue run in the 70s, which was one of the best comics of the 70s from Marvel, I would say. And then here's from a month or two ago, I finally caught up and read this issue 2 of Kaya that I bought. Again, the same as reaction to issue 1. So I'm not even sure why I bought issue 2. It must have been just that, that's part of the problem of my weekly comic book pickups. I always end up picking up more. It's like, might as well get Kaya too. Kaya's good, but not for me for various reasons. I do like some young adult stories, but this one just felt overly, I don't know, didn't engage me and maybe overly familiar. Although I'd say by issue 2, it does develop a little more of its own things going on. So that's pretty cool. So I can well imagine reading Kaya sometime down the road when it's completed. Thor, I at some point I bought Jane Foster and the Mighty Thor because I'd read the other 4 issues and this was the final issue, but it really was not worth it, which is a great shame because this miniseries started out quite strong. Art Brut. This is a 4-issue series, so I was enjoying it, but I'd be happy to just wait a long time and then read the rest of it later. But I wonder if I should pick it up to support it, in the sense that I'm hoping they will return to Art Brut. This is a reprint, and with retitled and with a few minor changes. But I assume that one reason why they're bringing it back is hopes of making new volumes of it too. So I might pick up all 4 issues. This, I believe, is a 2 of 4. Gru Against the Gods was fantastic, better than issue 1. And I continue to say, if you want to try out Gru, try any pure Gru. Do not go for the Gru meets Tarzan or the Gru meets Conan. That stuff is very tempting because then you have this. It seems like it would be more exciting having Gru and more funny having Gru meet these kind of straight characters that he's kind of based on. But no, it just doesn't click as well as a pure Gru book. Human Target. This one I'm definitely following to the end. It's one of my favorite of the current comic book market. And Tom King's doing a good job here. Greg Smallwood doing an utterly fantastic job. Danger Street, also by Tom King, does not click for me very much at all. And partially maybe because of my own expectations and what I would have liked out of it. A lot of the characters are turned into bad guys, in a sense. And I don't know. I'm sure a lot of people will enjoy all the moral grayness, or not even grayness, of some of the people who used to be good guys, I think, in the original comics have become bad guys. So anyway, interesting, but yeah. And then the major bit of reading I did was I read about 18 or 19 issues of Kamandi, the Last Boy on Earth. Last time around, I'd read issue 2, and we had done one sort of a prequel Kamandi show on Namin's channel. Since then, we've done a full Kamandi show, so to speak, a show where we talk about our favorite Kamandi issues. So I started skimming through Kamandis looking for my favorite issues, but then I just started reading issue after issue in order, and it became in preparation for a Comic Bookworm show, and it became a very intense experience, and I got a lot more out of it than I expected. But also, hats off to Namin and Roger Metarog from that chat we did. They really got my thoughts stirred up, and so I'm just got a lot more Kamandi. Got a lot more reading out of reading Kamandi this time around, thanks to those guys, and just thanks to all I've learned about Jack Kirby over the years, and just maybe my changing perspective coming from different issues that I've learned about over time. So it's just a wild ride, and I wonder how much this relates to Jack Kirby's war experiences in a weird way. And I think Kamandi is Jack Kirby, despite the fact they don't look very much alike. I mean, Jack Kirby did not have long blonde hair, for starters. I don't know if he ran around without a shirt on all the time either. But there's a number of really brilliant sort of sequences in here, some single issues, but this sequence that takes place with the Sacker Company and the Sacker Department Store and the Sacker Racetrack, Hialeah Racetrack, is really fantastic. 4 issues. The issue that focuses on Kamandi and Flower, of course, is a huge favorite of mine, and others. I can't even think of what they are right now, but yeah. This Watergate one now, I really appreciate a lot after Metarog talked a lot about this issue in that hangout we did. I somehow forgot that this issue was an issue that kind of explains possibly, or at least partially, how the animals evolved. It doesn't really explain how the humans devolved, and this is one of my favorite covers, and I really came to love the little gopher people in this one. It was sad when Kamandi had to leave them. Then there was this one where I'm not giving issue numbers, issue number 19. I skipped 17 in here. I seem to have misplaced my physical copy of 17. Or maybe I read that digitally, but I'm sure I have a physical copy of 17 somewhere. I have, for most, Kamandi's one of those comics that I frequently pick up if I find a cheap copy. And it seems to be much cheaper now than it was 10 years ago. So I have a lot of multiples of Kamandi. Anyway, this sequence, I was kind of sneering at it from my memory in the past. Oh, it's kind of a ripoff of that Star Trek episode where they go to a planet where everyone's in the mob. But even here, it was kind of a 2-issue sequence. Jack Kirby managed to pull some interesting things out of it along the way. And then, so that's issue 20. That's pretty much where I stopped. But I had skimmed some other issues as I was preparing for that best of or favorites Kamandi hangout that we did. But this was one that I remembered as a favorite, so I gave it a full read, and I really loved it again. And that's another favorite Kamandi cover of mine. So I'll flip the camera around. We'll take a look inside. I'm going to take a quick look here because there's so many issues. That's a favorite splash page of mine. In fact, I've tried to draw it many times with limited success. And one of the features of Kamandi is there's always a big splash page. This issue has two big splash pages, and I think it's warranted because this image of the gorilla city is just kind of mind-blowing. Um, Kirby, just on the spur of the moment for a few pages, designed a whole different way, a different way to live. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Tinker Toys, but the apes keep reappearing, and I can't help wondering, did editorial want him to throw a lot of apes in this comic? Because they particularly reappear a lot in maybe the first 15 or 20 issues. Did they encourage him to make it seem more like a Planet of the Apes knockoff? Even though we now know, as you can see in the discussion on Comic Bookworm's channel, that that Kamandi developed out of ideas Kirby had been working on for a long time, since the 50s. This one, I love the appearance of the demon in there. The thing about the double page spread, some people, especially back then, complained about it because they were used to, like getting a minimum of 4 panels per page. And there's not only double page spreads, but a lot of splash pages. But they really work well, I was realizing after reading so many in a row, for setting the scene, for giving you a lot of information at once. And in some ways, because of the way Kirby can do a splash page, you get as much out of a splash page as you do out of 2 pages of connected story. Also, I found very intense this depiction of how the gorillas keep their slaves, their human slaves, or human cattle. And of course, the humans don't get along with each other, but they do speak a little bit, which is shocking. And I think at the end of this issue is where Flower shows up. Is it? Kamandi frees the humans. No, maybe that's in the next issue. I don't know. Yeah, it's probably the next issue. Kamandi frees the humans, and then Flower tags along with him. The tumult of conflict and war is one of the many uses Kirby puts these double-page spreads to. There's a lot. This is sort of like I said, I wonder how much of the World War II experience, even though this seems to be a kid comic, went into when there's Flower. She hasn't spoken yet. I think she speaks later on. So there she's speaking. One of the sloppinesses of Kirby is sometimes saying the humans can't speak, and then other times having some of the savage humans speak a little bit. And then going back later to having the evolved animals being surprised humans can speak, because Kamandi can speak. So anyway, there's certain this I know that Kirby did these comics in a headlong rush, and I think that's more. I'm more convinced than ever that he was a genius to do so much inventiveness in such a quick amount of time, and to sort of instinctively create all these layers and levels of his sci-fi futuristic world, and layers of sort of meaning and experience to all of this. This is still my favorite issue, but at this point, reading them all in a row, no one issue can really be a favorite. I stupidly clicked on a text message and got kicked off the phone. But anyway, they all flow together in much more intensely than I realized, because I've always read them as sort of single standalone issues. But the pulse pounding, never ending action is just crazy. And there are weaker moments for sure. Like, I'm not a huge fan of yet another take on King Kong, but it's still a good issue. Just not as big a fan. This was an issue I liked a lot. We got a brief view of the Lions City, and I think also in the issue before that, but we never really come back to the City of the Lions again after this. And we get a very poignant moment I felt, where Kamandi really does not want to be a pet, even if it means being safe and being able to live an easy life. Another kind of wild and powerful sequence to me is when they finally make it to the tracking, what do they call it? The tracking, it's this big globe anyway. The tracking center, the tracking, and so there's an intensity of them being attacked. You think, oh, finally we're going to arrive somewhere nice where humans are welcome. But no, it's just one wild thing after another. And we get introduced to the Misfit, who is another mutation of humanity. There he is. And I kind of wish that character had lasted longer. A bit of both a sympathetic and an evil character. And there's also in here, I don't know if it's in this issue or the next, where there's this germ called Mordicus that could kill a bacteria that could kill the entire world. We also had the concept that the tracking center is held up by a magnetic field, which was very cool. And when the magnetic field lets go, it finally gets shot off into space. So that ends any tracking center story. Kamandi's on his own again. But the tracking center is good thing it's sent into space, because this evil bacteria has taken over the whole tracking center. So it's just very intense. I guess getting texts on my phone while filming is a bit of a problem. And then there's a whole incredible sequence that takes place within the Sacker company and the Sacker department store that lasts for 4 issues and is really, really amazing. I'd never read all 4 issues in a row before, and the experience was very impressive. I started Kamandi with this issue, the second issue in the Sacker sequence, and I had to, as a kid, probably 11 years old. Let's see, what year did this come out? 1973, yeah, so I would have been about 11. Possibly 12, but probably 11. And I had to figure out the world of Kamandi just from this issue, which I think I did enough to be pretty excited by it. And pretty shocked by the topless girl right there. Although that is the most awkward attempt to hide the significant bits that I've ever seen. Normally Kamandi just has, Kirby just has the hair go over it. It just occurred to me, like, the name Kamandi's kind of weird, but it's explained that he comes from Command D. But maybe having his name start with a K is also kind of equating him with Kirby, Kurtzberg, Kamandi. I don't know. That might be stretching it a bit. So yeah, this sequence just builds and builds, and Kamandi's defiance, kind of both against animals and the inferiority of humanity, but against authority, against people who want to limit you and control you. I feel like maybe there was a bit of Kirby's own feelings about his career and where he wanted to be. And while he was a genius, he was sort of trapped in this commercial art form, but still making, I mean, Kamandi is not, it's a wild, wild ride. It's not a controlled comic book like DC or even Marvel would normally create back then. So the Kirby kind of struggling against this commercial world for his artistic expression. And he was a genius, but trapped, and partially trapped by his need to make a middle-class income for his family. There's, like Jack Katz, who did The First Kingdom, was willing to give up the hope of a middle-class lifestyle and also to be supported by his wife, I believe, and then ex-wife, even after they divorced, she was supported by her to create his art. And who knows, maybe without the commercial pressures and the incredible deadlines and all that, Kirby's work would have been very different, and perhaps there would not. I don't know. It might not. You will never know, of course. It might not have transcended this kind of stuff, or it might have. Here's an example of a double page spread. At first, you're like, well, what's the purpose? But really, this gives you a scope and a feeling for things that they just couldn't get into the small panels. And it brings you into this crazy world in an intense way. The saddest thing when Kirby went, and maybe even later at DC, because I noticed in the last few issues of Kamandi, the double page spreads go away. And then at Marvel, when he returned there, he started doing double page spreads, and then they asked him to stop doing that. But that was a horrible shame, and I think we all now appreciate the double page spreads. It's one of the special features of all of these 70s Jack Kirby books. This is the Watergate issue. Beautiful opening splash page. And then we sort of pan out to get more of the scene. I think when you're doing these kind of science fiction stories where you're in a weird world, those double page spreads really help. There's kind of another cool splash page, but completely different. Instead of a close-up, it gives us the smallness of these beings in the natural world around them. And then this is the crazy Watergate issue. Roger talked about it quite a bit in our hangout. That was very cool. This is the issue where we learn a lot about how the animals might have become intelligent at some point while a crisis was going on in the human world. This is one of my favorite covers. I love this worm. It's very cool inside the comic too. And I love the little gopher people who apparently are human mutants rather than gophers who've mutated into more humanoid-like creatures. But there's something you get, in the brief few pages that they appear, you start having an affection for them. And I think Kamandi does too. And it's kind of sad when he separates from them. And here's those in the days of the mob kind of stories. Probably for Kirby, not just a imitation of Star Trek, but a little way to fit in his obsession with the mob, because he did do a comic for DC that either lasted 1 or 2 issues called In the Days of the Mob, I believe. So he was very interested in that, and I guess he grew up in the era of the mobsters. And somehow the ending of this mobster thing is particularly poignant, where he comes out and it was all just an old sort of amusement park of the past. And he's alone once more after sort of the promise of maybe there being humans in the world. And then this one, number 31, the visuals of this are particularly stunning, where Ben Boxer gets turned into a sort of giant but unthinking kind of being. And we just get all kinds of interesting imagery of scale, the Gulliver effect, as it says, and the encounter with this spaceship, which is really cool, and a lot of Dr. Canis. So anyway, I really love this one. There's Prince Tufton's ship, Great Caesar's flagship, but Prince Tufton is captaining it at the moment. So very cool. Yeah, so I'm going to keep reading all the Kamandis. I'll probably reread this in order. Gru was magnificent. So far, age has not slowed or not negatively affected Sergio Aragonés's talent. It's hilariously funny. Aragonés and Mark Evanier working together. Just tons of detail in art. I was noticing in this issue how many different hats or headdresses Aragonés creates all over the place throughout this issue. And that's just one example of his sort of fecund, that word sounds weird, fecund creativity. And it's also just hilarious and fun. And you can jump in this new miniseries easily enough, although it does build off of the past two miniseries before it. And there's definitely something, the way that Gru humor works, it works a lot by the build-up and the kind of variations on the same theme. It somehow keep making it funnier. Yeah. And the new colorist is doing a fantastic job. Replacing Ton Luff is Carrie Strachan, and it's not fancy coloring, but there's a lot of color to do, a lot of figures to figure out. It can't be easy for the average person to try to tackle this and make it all look good. Like, look at these kind of crowded panels. Yeah, so that was a lot of fun. Also fantastic art, of course, Human Target. And here Greg Smallwood does his own coloring, and gotta tip the hat to how great his colors are too. And I think, it's kismet or talent or luck. The story that Tom King has come up with for this 12-issue miniseries has turned out to be perfect for Greg Smallwood, or Greg Smallwood's a perfect interpreter of what Tom King gave him. So it had, even though these are more expensive issues, I have felt like it's been worth reading in single issues because of the distinct quality of each chapter. Yeah, I do love this comic. I hope it doesn't let me down for the last two issues. I don't trust enough. Art Brut, very cool. Here I thought the colorist could have done more to distinguish the world of reality and the world of art. There is some difference. And one of the themes is how hard it is to return to reality after you're in the world of art. Which, how hard is it for us to return to our mundane lives after going into these worlds of art also. And I really appreciate the sort of backstory, which is sort of a pretend older, perhaps Silver Age story. And in this one, our hero goes into a Picasso sketch, and I thought that was really cool. And then another sort of possible masterpiece that I've been reading, I have misplaced issue 3, which is, otherwise I would have just kept reading through. So I have issues 1, 2, and 4, but I know I bought issue 3, and I just have to figure out where I misplaced it to. But even though it's 1991, and I'd kind of thought Gene Colan, even by the late 80s, had kind of, produced less good work, or even by the mid-80s. But this is fantastic work. Great inking also by Williamson, and also great coloring by, where's the credits? I lost the credits. I know they're here. Maybe they're in the other book. It's Laverne Kinderziski. And I've seen Laverne's work elsewhere, and he's always an excellent colorist, but he really helps to bring alive the Gene Colan storytelling. And Marv Wolfman is spinning a very cool tale here. I'd say my only caveat or thing that I wished was a little better was sometimes it's, and maybe it's on purpose, I guess, but sometimes it's hard to tell when we're in reality and when we're in sort of someone's hallucination or dream. Because in the whole first volume, Dracula isn't actually alive, but it took me, I struggled with the idea, is Dracula currently alive, or is he, but yeah, we find out by the end, he's still in his coffin with a stake through his heart. But thanks to this evil college professor, he gets another chance in life. And so this picks up with what happened to, what's his first name, Drake, the ancestor of Dracula, who was part of the team who was always hunting Dracula, what happened to him after Dracula was killed, and what happened to his relationship with, I can't remember anyone's first name, with Harker, the Harker woman. Anyway, very cool. Can't wait to find the other volumes and read that. If it holds up with these 2 issues, I would say that this is just as much a masterpiece as the best of the original Tomb of Dracula by Marv Wolfman and Gene Colan. And last but not least, more wild and crazy artwork. This time from, I'm always having trouble saying his name, Jerry Grandinetti. Jerry Grandinetti. And inks by Murphy Anderson, and that's not insignificant. But I wasn't expecting much when I saw Jerry Grandinetti's name attached to this, but he really goes all out in the wild and crazy artwork. I don't know if there's both Neil Adams and Jim Steranko and Steve Ditko kind of influence here, or where Grandinetti is drawing this stuff from. I know he worked with Will Eisner near the end of the Spirit run. But yeah, really cool art. It's the story's kind of like, who is this story for? It's got kind of cool, trippy stuff in it, but it doesn't have much in the way of characterization or anything like that. I found it interesting that the Spectre basically is completely separate from Jim Corrigan, but lives inside Jim Corrigan's body, and he kind of recharges his powers somehow by living in Jim Corrigan's body. And he can come out of Jim Corrigan's body to help Jim Corrigan in a tight spot. Anyway, yeah, it would have been interesting if Jerry Grandinetti ever drew Doctor Strange. So yeah, probably, like I'm saying, who was the Spectre for? It only ran 10 issues here. Later it returned in the 70s, and maybe by then there was a little more of an older audience. I don't know. Okay, well, let's flip the camera back around and we will do a bit of a haul bookshop. So I bought stuff at 2 different comic book shops, and I was hunting for Legion of Superheroes because Naman and Roger and I have agreed that our next chat, when we have it, probably in 3 weeks or something, I don't know exactly when, I will need time to read the books or reread them in some cases. We're going to talk about Mike Grell's run on Legion of Superheroes. So right at the beginning of Mike Grell's comic book career. And as old guys, we're all very interested in that. I think Mike Grell was probably the first Legion of Superheroes artist that I knew or that I could identify as a kid. So I always wanted, I kind of collect Legion of Superheroes comics at random, but now I had the goal to get every single Mike Grell comic. So these Legion of Superheroes ones fill out my Mike Grell run, which was very thin. So I got Legion of Superheroes, Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes number 203, which I think is the first issue where Mike Grell is both the penciler and the inker, as opposed to just the inker. And then 204. All of these were bought at I Like Comics, which if you're ever passing through Vancouver, Washington, I would highly recommend visiting. Their back issues are all half of the sticker price, so I got most of these for $3. So 207, 210. Now I have to actually dig out of my boxes the other issues, go over to the storage center and pick them up. That's 212. Most of these covers are by Grell too, which I really like. I definitely had this issue as a kid, 213. That cover looks really familiar. 218. 221. I don't know, is that the first appearance of Grimbor the Chainsman? Or maybe it's the issue before. But anyway, I remember kind of chuckling over him in later issues, drawn maybe by Steve Ditko. 223. 224. Perhaps someday this will lead into a discussion of Warlord, also with those same groups. So that, I think 224 might have been Grell's last issue. So he did about 20 issues of this Legion of Superheroes, but made a big impression on those of us who happened to be reading comics at the time. And then I picked up some comics that come before the time I discovered comics, because I started reading comics in 1971. But I seem to love the Silver Age. I seem to love the comics that came just before I started. Some kind of weird negative zone nostalgia. But here's a cool looking Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes from Adventure, in which everyone but Superboy gets turned into a toddler. They love their turning superheroes into toddlers back in the day. And then there's I grabbed 2 issues of Action Comics with Neil Adams covers, but I like to, by the time I complete my Silver Age Action and Superman runs, they'll probably be when they finally put out an omnibus of all of them. But there's only been like Golden Age Superman omnibuses so far, so it's been a long wait. But apparently Superman's committed a murder here. He's dead, Superman. You killed him with your bare fist. Superman feels pretty bad about it. And in the next issue, it looks like Superman goes to trial for his crime and gets to be accused by a small child. So these earlier Neil Adams Superman covers, they, I don't know, there's something funny about them, along with kind of the cool Neil Adams art. So that was that, but also the last time I'd been at I Like Comics, I noticed that they had some pretty old Mad magazines from the 50s and 60s, and I thought I would pick up some of those because I've never really read stuff from before the 70s. And but the 50s ones all were going for $30 and $40, and I couldn't bring myself to pull the trigger. There were plenty of 60s ones at the $10 mark, so I grabbed some of those, and I decided, well, why not focus on 1961, the year I was born? And so I did. And although this is the March 1961 issue, I'm guessing this might have been the first issue that hit the stands, because they always backdate them or forward date them. So if it was dated March 61, maybe it came out in January 61. So, because this is their 1961 cover, where they point out that the number 1961 reads upside down and right side up the same way. And they write the first upside down year since 1881 and the last upside down year until 609. And I never realized I was born in an upside down year. But that explains a lot. And then I grabbed the July 1961 issue because I was born in July. Although now that I've pointed out that these things came out late or early, this probably came out, in May or something. So maybe I should look for the, October 61 issue to get the one that actually came out the year I was born. It's funny, but I don't, other than comics history, because 61 is the year the Marvel Universe was born, with Fantastic Four #1, which came out a week after I was born. Other than that, I really don't know that much about the year 1961. So maybe Mad Magazine will teach me. So this is from 1960. I didn't notice that, but I was when I bought it. But I was attracted to all the political figures on the cover, all of whom want to vote for Alfred E. Newman as president. I only recognize some of them, and I don't know how many of these were running for president in 1960. Certainly not Truman, because I believe he would have been passed away. I don't know if Hubert Humphrey tried to get the nomination that year. We've got Tricky Dick and Tricky Jack there, both of who did run. There's Lyndon Johnson. Anyway, interesting stuff. And then even more interesting, and cover dated where's the cover date? Excuse me a sec. cover dated January 1961, so it probably didn't really come out in 61, but is this cover that is congratulating Richard Nixon for winning the presidency. We were with you all the way, Dick. And I was like, well, what's the joke here that they're doing a cover about the guy who didn't win? But flipped it over, and on the other side, it's the same magazine, but congratulating Jack Kennedy. We were with you all the way, Jack. So the joke is the flip. And probably this was published or sent to the printers before they knew who won the election. And that way, I imagine the people at the newsstand could choose which cover to put up, or maybe put covers next to each other. So I feel, I don't know, as a collector, somehow this seems particularly special to me. Again, it's kind of cool how Mad is kind of a distorted lens on whatever time it's part of. So, yeah, I'm real excited to read these. And then after our meal, when we went to Future Dreams, which is just kind of a very unusual shop, underground, in kind of an almost dungeon-like basement. And I used to shop there years ago when they were in an above-ground location. And it was always a bit chaotic, but it is way more chaotic now, but kind of in a fun way. And you can find a lot of books that you weren't expecting that might have been sitting on those shelves for a long time. The newest book I bought there, which might be quite new, I think it's 2021, is this reprint of old Elric stories by Druillet and Cawthorne. I didn't look at it closely when I bought it. I was kind of thinking I was getting a whole book of Druillet doing Elric. But more than half of it is this other artist, Cawthorne, who I guess was a friend of Michael Moorcock. So this was another very early rendition of the Elric story. It's kind of an interesting style. It's certainly not as unique and sophisticated as the Druillet. And then the Druillet, I don't know, story is, I think it might have been originally written for this comic rather than a adaptation, because it just says text by Michael Moorcock. It doesn't say adapted from or anything like that. And it implies that the full text of whatever Moorcock wrote is here. It's not adapted into comic book form. And as such, it feels more like an illustrated novel, or illustrated story, I should say. It's not a novel length. But very cool illustrations. So there's a lot of Elric material out there, and I bought a lot, but there's still a lot more to buy. I'm not sure where to cut myself off. I've never properly researched to figure out like which eras and all the different returns of Elric in comics, and perhaps often redoing the same stories. Anyway, this is a very cool volume, and even though it's brand new, it only had a list, or of the recent vintage, only has a list price of $20. And then of quite older vintage, and was this Hawks of the Sea, and this I really had to dig out from a sort of hidden shelf. This is a kitchen sink reprint of, I guess, the first Sunday comic strip style work that Will Eisner did. So Before the Spirit, it says in here that Eisner was 20 years old when he did this. But it was included it was part somehow of the Eisner studio. And eventually Eisner sold the studio, or sold his share of the studio, to Iger when he moved on to form his own studio to do The Spirit. So I guess he didn't own the rights to this, and it sort of has languished until whenever this thing was published, probably the 90s. 1986 from Kitchen Sink. So as those of you who've watched me for a long time know I'm a huge Will Eisner fan, and it's nice to have all this kind of, not quite juvenilia, but early Eisner for comparison. You can see bits and pieces of where it reminds you of later Eisner artwork. But for the most part, you realize he evolved a lot from this period, when, does it say, 1937, to, say, 1947. The difference is very startling. And then the thing I was most pleased in finding, because I had no idea it existed, was this Gray Morrow art book called Gray Morrow Visionary, published by some of ISG. And apparently this is the deluxe signed version. I'm thinking that this book may not have been a big publishing success, unfortunately, because if this has been sitting, perhaps been sitting in this store since 2001, and it's number 67 of 400 of the ones with the signed plate in them. Anyway, I was happy to get it, and I've only seen Morrow's comic book work is very kind of scattered all over the place. I've only seen some of it, but I always really admired his book covers and his paintings, which, while coming out in the late 60s and 1970s, always had a retro 1940s, 1950s kind of feeling to them. Or at least that's how I always viewed it. So anyway, I look forward to digging into this book. So that was a lot of fun, and thanks for sticking with me to the end of the video, those of you who had.